Now, Bruce Bauer, author of Stealing Jesus, How Fundamentalism Betrays Christianity. Our 20-minute conversation was recorded last month.
Bruce Bauer, we're talking to you today about a new book you've written called Stealing Jesus, How Fundamentalism Betrays Christianity. Why did you title your book Stealing Jesus?
Well, because I wanted to make it very clear what the book is trying to say about fundamentalism. I could have given it a softer title, a more academic-sounding title, but when it came down to it, the point of the book is that fundamentalism, or the term I use in the book is legalism, because I'm talking not just about strict, biblically literalistic Protestant fundamentalism in America today, but about this whole phenomenon of people who emphasize what I talk about in the book as the church of love, as opposed to the church of law. And these people aren't necessarily all fundamentalists there. Some of them are evangelicals, some of them are charismatic. But what they do all have in common is that they've subscribed to a variety of Christianity that really does yoke the name of Jesus to ideas that are alien to what Jesus really was about.
Why did you decide to write about fundamentalists in your book?
Well, about 9 years ago, I found myself drawn into the Episcopal Church. I have Protestant and Catholic, a Protestant Catholic background myself. I wasn't raised in a very religious home, and if anybody had told me 15 years ago that I would be a regular churchgoer in a few years, I would have been shocked. But I did find myself drawn into an Episcopal church. I was drawn to it by the preaching. I was drawn into it by what the preaching and the worship taught me about what Jesus was about, and it made sense of the world for me in a way that nothing ever quite had. And as the years went by, and I, continued as a member of this church, I was increasingly puzzled by the fact that here was something called Christianity that had become something very important to me, and yet here was this other thing also called Christianity that was not only alien to me, that not only seemed to be something that didn't speak to me at all, but it was something that disturbed me, that seemed to me dangerous. And I wanted to, understand how did these two totally different things come to be and to share the same name.
What did you find out in the course of writing your book about these two different branches of Christianity?
Well, one thing that I found out that was interesting was that, I'm a baby boomer, and a lot of us when we were kids read a play called Inherit the Wind about the Scopes trial, and in the 1920s. And what we were taught when we read that play was that, well, here was this thing called fundamentalism, and it came into conflict with this thing called modernism or liberalism, modern thought, personified by Clarence Darrow, and it lost. It didn't strictly lose the trial, but it lost in the court of public opinion. It was humiliated, and it went away with its tail between its legs.
Remind us again what the trial was about.
Well, the trial was about a teacher named John T. Scopes in Tennessee who had been teaching evolution, and the fundamentalists opposed that. So he was tried for teaching that. There was a law in Tennessee on the books against that. And so it became, in a way it was engineered. The ACLU was on the side of the teacher, and they hired Clarence Darrow, the great populist, modernist, agnostic lawyer of the day, to defend him. And they, William Jennings Bryan, who had been candidate for president 3 times and who was a Presbyterian fundamentalist and a great populist hero himself, was on the other side, and anyway, he won on a technicality, but ultimately the upshot of the trial was that in the media, in the mainstream media of the day, Brian came off to look like a fool. The fundamentalists realized that if they were going to play on the field of the mainstream media of the day, they were going to lose. And they just kind of retreated from sight. And that is what happened. They retreated from sight. But what we were led to believe as kids was that that this was the beginning of the end of fundamentalism. It was just this thing that was, well, maybe it was still around in some form, but it was going to die away eventually. And the real truth of the matter is that fundamentalism was really just in its infancy at the time of the Scopes trial.
What year was that?
1925. And fundamentalism, in its American Protestant form in this century, is something that basically is only about 100 years old. It's something that arose as a direct response to modern progress, modern science, modern diversity, modern complexity and ambiguity. It's something that in all its forms, whether it's Islamic fundamentalism or Hindu fundamentalism or any other kind of fundamentalism, these are responses to modern developments by people who need a sense of surety, of certitude. They need something to hold on to. They need everything to be black and white. And this is something that has grown over the last, half century and more since the Scopes trial. And far from being, traditional Christianity as it likes to bill itself, it's really a very young movement in its present form.
Your book focuses primarily on Christian fundamentalists. Mm-hmm. Tell us about some of the leaders in the fundamentalist movement today and what their backgrounds are.
Well, we might start with Pat Robertson, of course. Pat Robertson is very important in the movement, of course, not just because he's head of the Christian Coalition and of the Christian Broadcast Network and of Regent University and the host of the 700 Club, but because he really is responsible for having brought together the different strands of what we now think of as the religious right into a single movement. He brought together fundamentalists who, in their basic essential form, are separatists. I mean, one of the basic ideas of fundamentalism is you withdraw from the society because the society is of the devil, and the only way to stay pure is to stay apart from it. He took that movement, helped to bring it a little bit away from that orientation. He took conservative evangelicalism, and he took the charismatic movement. And these are movements which had a lot of friction between them, and he managed to bring them together into one force. And he is a charismatic. He is an evangelical. He calls himself a spirit-filled evangelical, and he's managed to cohere these groups into one force by convincing them that they do share a common enemy in the common culture.
Here at C-SPAN, we cover a lot of politics.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the role of fundamentalist leaders like Pat Robertson and others in politics in Washington and across the country in voting and the like.
Well, the Christian Coalition, in Pat Robertson's organization, has an extraordinary impact politically at the grassroots. His genius has been to really found the organization at the grassroots level, to take it everywhere. Before every major election, they distribute a huge number of voter guides around the country, in every district in the country, in which they have little charts showing the candidates for the major offices and what their supposed stands are on various issues. Now, these voter guides are presented by them as being objective. They say, well, we're just providing information. And the fact is that the way in which they provide the information is very skewed. First of all, they select certain issues. They leave out certain issues. Second of all, when they know that the candidate that they really want people to vote for has a position that the voters may not like, or if the candidate they don't want people to vote for has a position they might like, they'll say something like no response rather than actually giving what the person's position is. Sometimes they'll just outright misrepresent the position of a candidate on a certain issue, or they'll frame the issue in a certain way so as to represent it, in the larger sense of the truth, falsely, or they'll find one vote somewhere in the person's history, perhaps a 20, 30-year history voting record, find one vote that, on the basis of which they can say this person's against this or that or the other thing. And so in that way, they've managed to have an immeasurable impact on elections around the country.
How many people in America are part of the Christian Coalition? Is it a number that we can determine?
That's hard to say. They've floated certain numbers that are said to be inflated. They have membership lists. They have, lists of people who receive, their materials. It's less important how many people I think actually are, official members of the organization than the fact that there are so many millions who do, turn to people like Pat Robertson to, decide how they feel about what's going on in politics today. They turn in the 700 Club and they get, into CBN News, and they can get a slant on the issues that shapes the way in which they understand the issues.
Do you think there's a role for religion in politics or in education? What do you think about these issues?
I think it's hard to keep religion out of anything as long as it's a part of people's lives. Anybody who's truly religious can't keep their religion out of any part of their lives. And certainly my religion is a part of my way of thinking about politics and education and every other issue. But the danger comes when people bring religion into the situation in such a way as to try to deny other people their rights. That's what it comes down to. Legalism, legalistic Christianity, is really about trying to impose certain religious attitudes on the culture, and I think that's a problem.
Who did you have in mind when you wrote this book? What kind of reader do you want to pick up and buy this book and read it?
Well, on the one hand, I would like to think that it'll get in the hands of some people who do consider themselves fundamentalists or evangelicals, conservative evangelicals, conservative charismatics. I would like to think that there are a lot of people in that movement who may be open to or challenged to a lot of the things they've been taught to think about what their faith is and about how their faith should enter into their attitudes about other people's lives and faith and politics. But I suppose mainly the audience for the book is mainline Protestants, liberal Catholics, secular Americans of every stripe, who I think may have been carrying out a policy of, you might say, benign neglect toward the growth of legalistic Protestantism in America. I think that the more that non-legalists can know about what legalism is really about, the more they may be spurred to recognize it as at least a potential danger to civil society, and to be more proactive about it.
This book, Stealing Jesus, was published by Crown, a division of Random House.
That's right.
How did you get Crown interested in publishing your work, and did you look at religious publishers as well?
Well, let's see. The editor on this book happened to be at Crown, and she was the editor on a previous book that I did called A Place at the Table, The Gay Individual in American Society. That came out 4 years ago. And I wanted very much to work with her again. And so we had been talking about ideas for my next book. And so she thought this sounded like something she would like to do with me. And she, as I say, happens to be at Crown, so that's how I ended up at Crown.
There's another book that you've written called House and Home with Steve Gunderson and Rob Morris.
Right.
Tell us about that book and how you came to work on it.
Oh, that was interesting. Steve and Rob, well, Steve Gunderson was, until the last election, congressman from the 3rd District of Wisconsin, the Republican member from Wisconsin, and he had come out as a gay man, first openly gay Republican member of the House. And he and his partner Rob Morris, who is a very good architect, a very gifted architect, builder and designer and remodeler of houses, wanted to do a book about themselves as a couple. And let me see, how did we come together? Their agent happened to be the agent of a friend of mine, who, and she asked my friend, who do you think would be a good person to do this book with, Steve and Rob? And he suggested me, and she suggested me to them, and they said, oh, he wouldn't be interested in this. But they had both read A Place at the Table and had admired it, and so they suggested we get together, if only because it might be fun. And so I came down to Washington from New York, where I live, and Steve picked me up at Union Station, and he wanted to carry my bag. He insisted on carrying my bag, and I thought, this is very ridiculous. A congressman shouldn't be carrying my bag. And he drove me back to the house, and Rob was there, and Rob immediately ordered him to make us all drinks. And we sat down, and within a few minutes I felt very close to them, felt I really liked them. I felt I could really do a book about these guys. They seemed to challenge every stereotype about congressmen and about gay people. And that was the idea of the book. You know, they wanted to tell their story. This is about two men who did, create a life together as a family against all kinds of very interesting challenges. It was a lot of fun to work on it with them.
Tell us about what some of the reaction has been to that book, House and Home, to your other book, A Place at the Table, and also, have you received any reaction to the new book, Stealing Jesus?
Well, to start with this, it's really been out so briefly that the only response has been a handful of reviews, which have been very good, and the responses from a few audiences that I've given talks and readings to, which have also been very good. I've been really enthused to find that the church audiences I've read to have really been excited to see a book like this that just kind of brings together a lot of material that they really do want to know about. But as I say, there hasn't been a wider response than that yet. The other books, A Place at the Table, was quite an experience. There was a lot of controversy surrounding that book. The right was very hostile toward it, and a lot of people on the gay left were hostile toward it too, because it was an attempt to talk about gay people as being integrated into the society. And that's something that threatens both the right, especially the religious right, and that threatens a lot of people on the gay left who are kind of married to this idea of us being ghettoized, marginalized, constantly grasping onto our victim status. And the response to House and Home was, I think, similar to that in a lot of ways. I mean, Steve and Rob would be able to answer that question better than I, because they were the ones who went down and publicized it. It was wonderful to work on that with them, because after it was over, they went out and did all the work, and I went on to the next book.
How did they all sell comparatively, A Place at the Table and House and Home?
I really don't know how the House and Home... Place at the Table and House and Home were both #1 bestsellers, and certainly in the gay bookstores. And they sold very well outside the gay stores too. And Place at the Table is still selling very well. It's in paperback. I still see it in the gay sections of all the major bookstores, and people still write to me about it, who having just read it for the first time. And House and Home hasn't yet gone into paperback, so we'll have to see how much of an afterlife it has.
Bruce Bauer, we thank you for coming to talk to us about your new book,